can unmute and also to share the screen. Right. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Great. Now I need to also share the screen. I guess I cannot share the screen yet.
I think so, yes.
Let me
Is
see.
it okay now?
No, not yet. I cannot share the screen. You have to make me co-host. Oh,
actually,
it's another participant is sharing the screen, so I need to. They need to stop sharing. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Just a second.
Professor.
Okay. Now I can hear. Perfect. Okay. I think it's fixed. Probably. Okay. Good morning,
Professor
everybody.
Rojas.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes.
Good to see you. We are pretty happy with with that opportunity to have your speech for us today. We have 83 participants at this moment in that webinar. We are pretty amazed with the good number of people interested in you. Actually, I am very interested in hearing about you and Professor Luis Matoso and Dr. Caio Otonio. You know them very well. They have joined us in the meeting. Caio and Professor Matoso, please open your videos, your cameras.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Caio, just open your camera.
I think it's open, isn't it? Can you see me? Orlando? Cauê?
Hello,
Perfect.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, good afternoon, Orlando. How are you doing?
Very good.
Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to give this lecture. And I apologize because of the time change, we have this little confusion. I did appreciate your attendance to this lecture. And I also want to thank Caio for helping us to arrange this. Very nice seeing you again.
I'm very happy to also to join.
Pretty good, Professor. Caio, wanted to give some introductory notes.
Yeah, it's actually a pleasure to be here because Matoso is my former boss and Orlando is also my former boss and Cauê is kind of a former boss. So pleasure to join you guys today. And it's a really great pleasure to have Orlando talk to you. I'm sure he has some good insights that we have a lot of potentials for collaborations and for synergies that we are going to identify today. So happy to have you here, Orlando, and thanks Matoso and Cauê for arranging and inviting.
Pretty good. Matoso, can you introduce Professor Orlando Rojas for our audience?
Yes. So I would like to thank everybody for the attendance to this lecture. It's really a great pleasure to have you all here joining this very important presentation. I'd like to give a brief introduction to the curriculum of Professor Orlando Rojas. Professor Orlando Rojas is a Canada Excellent Research Chair in top ranked University of British Columbia and a program that supports world-renowned scientists. In this condition, he is the director of the Bioproducts Institute and shares affiliations with 3 departments of chemical and biological engineering, chemistry, of wood science, and part of his research group, bio-based colloids and materials, also operates in Aalto University, Finland. Professor Rojas has received the 2018 Anselm Payan Award, established by the American Chemical Society in 1962, the highest recognition in the area of cellulose and renewable materials. So it's a very, very important recognition. In addition, Professor Rojas is an elected as Fellow of the American Chemical Society in 2013, the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters 2017, and recipient of the TEP Nanotechnology Award in 2015. He's also adjunct professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering in the state of University of the United States, and distinguished professor in the South China University of Technology, and also at the Nanjing Forest University and Dalian Polytechnic University. During his career, he has advised 40 postdoctoral fellows, 55 PhD, and 34 Masters of Science students. He has hosted 112 international visiting scholars and professors. With an age index of 70 by Google Scholar, he has authored about 410 peer-reviewed papers and a large number of conference contributions related to the core research, mainly dealing with nanostructures from renewable materials and their utilization in multi-phase systems. So it's a really great pleasure and honor to have Professor Orlando Rojas. And the idea is that you give a talk of about 45 minutes, and then we have 15 to 20 or even more minutes to discuss with the Brazilian, most with the Brazilian community, which kind of research we could do in collaborating with you. Caio Ottoni was a PhD student at your lab, and so we have a really great interest in collaborate with you. Thank you so much for accepting to give this lecture.
Thank you so much. You are so warm, and I feel part of the family already. This is great, Luis. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to see Caio, Washington. I see also Andre and many old friends joining today's meeting. We have 100 plus people. This is really great. And I apologize for coming a little bit late, a few minutes late. I thought the time was 1 hour later because of the change in time zone here. I thought it was an hour later, but luckily I have the presentation already prepared, so I can start. So I will share the screen, and thank you, Luis, for the introduction. This is very kind of you that you more or less related to our work and our contribution. But I have to say, of course, nothing happens if it is not for the students and the scientists that do the work. And I had to say there are many Brazilian scientists that are really top-notch and are at the forefront in this area. So I hope that the communication goes well. If you find that my voice breaks, I can change the position in my home because I'm using wireless. But please let me know. I can change the room, and probably the communication will be better. But if this is okay, is the sound coming okay? I hope. Okay, good.
Perfect, Professor.
Excellent. So I will go ahead and tell a little bit about our recent work in the area that is of interest to all of you. And I will be talking mainly about nanotechnologies. And I will make this in a very, how to say, applied way. But of course, we can go deeper into the science. But for the short time that we have, probably I only can talk about the surface or the big picture aspects of the work. And as Luis indicated, I'm joining you from Vancouver, Canada, in the University of British Columbia. So beyond the science, I want to open my labs to any visitors, to any collaborator. You will be warmly welcome in Vancouver. And I think this makes a good case because the campus here is absolutely beautiful. There is a lot of forest, and we have the sea very close by, a nice beach that one can go, and also we have the mountains very close, and then besides this, the city. So besides the science, we have also a nice place to do science, and this is the location in Vancouver. And I'm director of the Bioproducts Institute. In this institute, we have about 40 professors and their researchers or their research groups working together in many different aspects, from molecular biology up to biorefineries. So this is what is important in this institute, the Bioproducts Institute, is that we cover a large range of activities, from genomics to airplanes. And what I do here is mostly related to multi-phase systems, especially the application of renewable nanomaterials. And I noticed that in Brazil, this is a very important topic, at least it's a very popular one. In the last few months, you can see here, just from October, I have given 4 seminars, 4 seminars, including today's seminar on the far right, the agro nano. And that means that there is a lot of activity in Brazilian research landscape in this area. And as I said before, of course, nothing will happen if it is not for the students. And here I want to acknowledge the contribution of all the students in my group that are really amazing people. And I think all my life is dedicated to them, pretty much. I'm very committed to my students and my researchers. But one thing I need to say is that in the last years, we have had a lot of students from Brazil, and those that you see with circles are Brazilian students, and several of you are here. Washington from Embrapa came for a short time to Aalto, and it was a pleasure to have him visiting us in Finland at that time. And then we have here, you can appreciate some other faces with people in the group. Anyway, so I will talk about renewable nanomaterials. That's a topic of current research. And of course, when we think about it, we should consider both nanocellulose in the 2 forms, nanocrystalline cellulose, as well as nanofibrillar cellulose. And these are on the far left, as you can appreciate. But there are also other particles that I want to discuss, and that would be lignin, micro and nanoparticles, as well as tannin particles. Maybe I have no time to talk about tannins, but I know in Brazil, this is a very important topic, and we have been working on those as well. I have no time today, but please check the literature and the work in the group, and maybe you can find some interesting developments in the area of tannins. Lignin, I will give an example about lignin. It's very exciting. I noticed that lignin is coming very strong as a subject for research nowadays, and I will talk very briefly about lignin. And then the other one is chitin. Chitin, both nanofibrillar and crystalline chitin, similar to cellulose, is a subject that is increasing in importance. And in my lab, we're working a lot with chitin as well. The main advantage of chitin, in my mind, compared to cellulose, is that it contains amino groups. After partial deacetylation, you can activate these nanomaterials with cationic charges. And this is very important because in many applications, having cationic charges can be a huge advantage. And this is unique to chitin. For cellulose, we are bound to have mainly anionic groups, but with chitin, these are already given in nature. And the beauty is that with chitin, we can control the degree of deacetylation, and that means also the hydrophobic, hydrophilic balance, as well as the electrostatics of the system. Today, I won't talk about chitin again because of time, but I refer mainly to cellulose and lignin. And probably you are already seeing my background as I speak. This is my home in Vancouver, in campus, in UBC. And in fact, this photo here that you see in front of you is my living room. And I put around several objects. And I want to make this conversation with you a little bit very practical, in the sense that I want to say that all around my home, but also in your home, if you check around you, you will find many opportunities for cellulosic materials. So here I put an example of different subjects that we can talk about where cellulose and lignin can be used. So I start with the ones in blue. These are the ones that I'm not going to talk because of time. I will concentrate more on those that are in red. So starting with the blues, I have to say that with lignin and with cellulose, there are huge opportunities in producing materials for energy management. That would be here at the wall, using phase change materials. A lot of work in this area. Is a beautiful subject. Also in the area, for instance, for light, there is a mistake here. It should be light management here in the window. As you may know, there is a lot of interest in producing transparent wood. And this is an area that we're also working, producing transparent wood. In biofabrication, this is something that in Brazil is very popular, of course. The area of biofilms produced by bacterial cellulose, bacterial microorganisms that produce cellulose. And we have been very interested in processes of biofabrication. And I have a full lecture about biofabrication. It's a very interesting topic. Then also PPE. I think this is a very important example of how the power of the forest can be used to solve a global problem, and that will be the face masks. And we have a big project that we started earlier this year, where we're using foam forming, a technology similar to paper making, but using foams to produce face masks using natural fibers. I have no time to talk about it, but this is an example that I wanted to refer. Then, of course, very hot topic, packaging materials and single-use plastics. Very, very important topic. So these are the subjects that I'm not going to talk about, but I will talk about those that are in red. So essentially, I will walk around my living room and share with you some of the activities that we have in this area. And for that, I will start with lignin. I'm sure that you all know about lignin. I have to say, lignin has become a very interesting renewable nanomaterials. Of course, lignin has been known since long time ago, but you can sense that in the last 10 years, the number of publication and scientific activity around lignin has really increased. And in fact, there are many investments in pulp and paper and forest industries to look into lignin, not as a material to produce energy, in energy cogeneration, but rather to look into lignin as a value-added material. And this is important to highlight because I can identify in Brazil, in Canada, and elsewhere, a lot of investments in the area of lignin production, not for use in a boiler, but rather to produce fibers and to produce many other things. Just to give an example, in Germany, UPM has now a stream related to lignin research and utilization. So to me, lignin will be more and more a molecule that will be a center in the biorefinery concept. So nowadays we talk not only about biorefineries that are centered around cellulose, but also lignin-centered biorefineries. And there is a lot to say about lignin. Of course, this is a very large field of work. I just want to say an interest in the area of nanotechnologies, and this is using lignin from black liquors, from pulp processes, to then produce the nanoparticles that you see in the center of the slide. So these are the lignin micro and nanoparticles. And in this process, what we use is what you see on the left is an atomizer system or aerosol flow system where we have lignin in the bottom. And then by using a gas stream, we can carry the liquid droplets into gas, typically air, that is hot air, and then the particles will be formed. It's similar to a spray drying, but here we use more like laminar flow. And by using this process, then the particles are produced very, very easily. And these particles are composed, in this particular case, of lignin from solution, and the black liquor can be from organosolv or from craft processes, etc. I just want to mention that, of course, as you well know, the composition or the chemical makeup of lignin is quite challenging to determine, and still we have this debate whether lignin is more a linear molecule or more branch or cross-link molecule. And I invite you to check the paper in the bottom that we have with Mikhail Balakshin, where we unveil a little bit more details about the molecular structure of lignin. But this still is an ongoing conversation and ongoing debate. The question here is whether we take lignin to crack it, to deconstruct lignin, or if we should use lignin as a colloidal material. And I prefer the second option. I take lignin to make use of the colloidal activity of lignin. So for that reason, we produce these particles of lignin, and the beauty of this type of system compared to any other systems that you know in the area of spherical particles is the fact that with lignin, we can produce these nanomaterials with different surface energy by selecting not only the tree species, the wood species that are used in to produce the lignin, but also the process, whether craft, organosolv, etc. So we can make the lignin drop, and therefore the lignin particle to change the wettability. Beyond that, you notice that those are perfectly spherical particles, but another topic that is interesting in nanotechnology is controlling the shape and especially the surface rugosity or the wrinkling phenomena in small particles. This is well known in the case of pollen, right? And there is a reason for those interesting shapes. For instance, some pollen types are given with given rugosities or wrinkling. In the case of the anemophilus, these are because of the interaction with the wind, or the entomophilus because they are insect loving. So in nature, intelligence is such that the material adjusts its morphology depending on the function, and that's very interesting. So looking into pollen-like particles can be very interesting. And on the right, I show an example of synthetic particles that are produced by microfluidics. But the good news is that for lignin, we can produce pretty much those particles with a very good control on the wrinkling on the surface of the particles. So we have been looking at lignin particles, not only smooth and perfectly spherical, but also wrinkled particles, because in that way we can control the interactions. And this is important in aerosol technologies, in pharma, in food, and in coatings. So controlling the wrinkling on the surface is very important. And I cannot expand too much in this short time, but I want to say that we have been looking at the interactions, colloidal interactions between particles and surfaces, and colloidal interparticle interactions as a function of the shape and the morphology, whether the lignin particle is smooth or if the particle is wrinkled, as you can see here. And for that, we have used techniques that are available in our labs, such as cryo-electron tomography, to look inside the particles as well as outside. So that was just very briefly about lignin, and I will give another example of lignin later on. But maybe here there is still an opportunity for me to expand on lignin. And let's look at coatings. You see here the floor of my living room or the table. And there is here the chance for us to use lignin particles in creating coatings, and those coatings can be made in such a way that they are functional coatings with the given properties, as you can see here: antioxidant, UV shielding, and antimicrobial. These are properties that you all know for lignin. So a particular case is the case of particulate coatings. Essentially, what we do here is we take the lignin particles in dispersing water, for instance, or in any other solvent, and then we let the solvent to evaporate. So in a process called self-assembly induced by evaporation, the particles will form a film or a coating. The particles you see on the left, that will be the cross-section of the coating that you see on the right. And this is a coating on glass. And those particulate coatings are interesting because, as you can imagine, we can control the assembly of the particles in such a way that the permeability or the mass transport across the coating can be controlled, whether it is for air or liquids. That transport properties will depend on the densification of the coating and the distribution of the particles. You notice here that the bigger particles are in the bottom, the smaller particles are on the top, but that can be regulated by having control on the evaporation rate and the particle size. Using dimensional numbers like Peclet number and others, we can control the diffusion of the particles in the system during evaporation, and then we can structure the material in such a way that we can control the distribution of the particles across the film. Beyond that, those films, because are formed by particles of lignin, are structured, and in the surface they are not really smooth, and that's good for hydrophobization, especially if we hydrophobize the lignin particle, which is very easy. Then it's very simple for us to produce these super hydrophobic coatings with a tilt angle of 5 degrees and a water contact angle, I believe in this case was close to 165 degrees. The other beautiful aspect of this type of coatings based on lignin particles is the fact that we can take advantage of a couple of properties of lignin. One is the antioxidant property of lignin. It is illustrated here. The antioxidant and radical scavenging possibilities for lignin. Also the UV shielding shown here in the center, also plotted in the bottom as far as the light transmitted versus wavelength. And finally, the anti-fouling phenomena that can be promoted by using lignin coatings. And in particular, if you think about these coatings, maybe you can imagine that they are very difficult to keep together. But one thing that we have found in our work is that if we combine the lignin particles with nanocellulose, as you see here in green, then we can get very interesting coatings and even self-standing films that are pretty strong. And this can open many opportunities. And we're still working on the topic. Let me talk a little bit about cellulose nanofibers. I'm sure you are familiar with this material. This is an important subject, and we have been working for more than 10 years on nanocellulose. And one topic that is of interest, both in Finland and also here in Canada, is to look into cellulosic streams as a possibility to produce next generation yarns, fabrics, and textiles. As you may know, the case of cotton is a difficult one. There is a so-called cotton gap. In the future, the demand of cellulosic fibers will increase, but cotton is an agricultural bioproduct that has a lot of challenges. They include the fact that it's not fully sustainable. If you think about the amount of water it demands, the amount of pesticides, biocides, and the control that is required in the harvesting of cotton. This is a major problem. And already many companies around the world are looking into using more and more wood as a solution to produce textiles. So let's go to my sofa there in my living room. and look into an example of what we're doing related to spinning yarns. And for that, we have chosen nanocellulose. So if we take nanocellulose, cellulose nanofibrils in particular, we can then use this process of wet spinning to produce the yarns. Most of the work in this area uses dissolved cellulose, but again, as I talked about lignin, we prefer not to go to the molecular scale. We want to exploit the nanotechnology, the inherent assets of the nanomaterial in such a way that we don't dissolve cellulose, but we keep the nanoscale structuring. And for that reason, we don't dissolve cellulose, but rather in the extruder, we use a colloidal dispersion of nanocellulose. It can be tempo oxidized in this particular case. And then using a coagulation bath, and there will be some ion exchange or solvent exchange, and the coagulation will make the filaments to be formed and then collected. So that's the process, simple process of wet spinning. And in this process, we use aqueous hydrogels of nanocellulose. In the coagulation bath, we use either organic solvents like ethanol or acetone, but typically ethanol. Or we can also use acidic bath or as well of water with the calcium chloride, so aqueous solutions. They all work very well, and this is the setup that we have designed with the students and they have built. In fact, in this slide here, you can see a video of the spinning machine in operation. And I have shown this in other presentations, and apologies if you have seen this before. But for many of you that are new in this topic, then you maybe realize how cool, how nice this is. Essentially, as I explained earlier, we take nanocellulose suspensions and then we extrude the suspension in the coagulation bath that you saw here on top. This is the extruder, this is the bath, the film is formed, the filament, and then it's collected. So it's very simple process. And it's very well-known process in textiles and other industries. So it's nothing new, but the use of nanocellulose is new. And further development that I want to refer to is what about using lignin in the same system? So on the right, you can see the type of system that now we are working on, and that is using tempo oxidized nanocellulose, and we add lignin. We also have used on the left this other option. The other option is to use lignin containing nanocellulose. This is one of my favorite materials, and we have done a lot of work in this area. That is not really obtaining from bleached fibers lignin-free nanocellulose, but on the contrary, to keep lignin in the pulping process and then use the lignin-containing fibers to produce ligno-nanocellulose. And for that here, we have been using thermomechanical pulps. Here in Canada, mechanical pulping is still an important segment. I don't know in Brazil, maybe not too much. But these mechanical fibers contain the residual lignin up to, in this case, 28% of lignin, and they can be fibrillated and used in spinning. So we have used the two. But for the sake of time, I will only refer to this system where we take lignin and we mix it with tempo oxidized nanocellulose. Lignin alone will be very difficult to spin. So we need to have tempo oxidized nanocellulose to be able to allow for the spinning process to happen. And that process produced very beautiful microfibers. You see this on top. This is the microfiber with tempo oxidized nanocellulose on the far left, and this is the cross section. And as we add more and more lignin, we move to the right, and this is a fiber that has 70% of lignin, 30% of nanocellulose. This is the cross section. In the bottom, you see the alignment of nanocellulose by wax. And the main point here is that when we add lignin, we disrupt the alignment of nanocellulose. And that means that the mechanical properties will be penalized. So for that reason, the mechanical properties of this microfiber here are lower than those produced from pure cellulose. And it's because we have less alignment of nanocellulose. But having lignin in our mind is important because in such a way we can produce carbon materials. As you know, lignin is a material that can produce very high carbon yields. Therefore, if we are looking into electroactive components, carbonization is needed, and for that reason, then we prefer to use ligno nanocellulose, or as I explained here, we want to add lignin to the filament spinning. So that's what we have. The beautiful aspect of this composition is that having cellulose mixed with lignin can produce highly porous microfibers. And after carbonization, those porosities are in the mesoscale or mesopores. And these are very important for electroactive functions. One of those is the plain electrical conductivity. As you can appreciate, the carbon fibers produced by this process are conductive. And one thing that I need to say, as you can read in the bottom, is that the carbonization happens at low temperature. We don't need to have pre-oxidation steps. So it's a very simple process, and we save a lot of energy not having to go to higher temperatures. And then given the mesoporosity of the system, then what we found is that these materials can be used for their capacitive properties. So that would be another advantage of these functional microfibers that I present here. And that's shown here on the right, the idea of using this microfiber in wearables, given the capacitance and activity of the materials. The other component that is interesting in these microfibers is the fact that in the spinning dope, we can add given components, and this is very unique in the case of spinning colloidal suspensions, as opposed probably to spinning typical solutions. And in this particular case, the fact is that we can add, for instance, magnetic particles during the spinning so that we can produce magnetic microfibers. And an example is shown here in this case. And these magnetic particles can be used, or fibers can be used for magnetic shielding. But one particular application that I'm interested, and I have a former student that has a startup company here. The company is called TerraLoop, is to use this type of fibers that are conductive and also magnetic in the so-called flying wheels. If you Google flying wheels, you will see that this is an old technology that essentially transforms electrical energy into kinetic energy. And it's a way for us to store energy so that we can release the energy on demand. This is very important because that's one of the challenges, how to store energy. And for that, in this particular case, we use flying wheels that require conductive fibers that are also magnetic. And for that, lignin can be utilized. This morning, I had a meeting with this group, TerraLoop. This is a startup, and they continue working with us. Let me talk about a different type of fiber, not with lignin, but with a cellulose derivative. And I want to refer to carboxymethyl cellulose. That's a very common cellulose derivative. Of course, it contains carboxyl groups. And we have grafted on the carboxymethyl cellulose dopamine. And as you know, dopamine is a very interesting molecule, very important in hormones, but also can be very cheap and easily produced. And that type of system is very interesting for the same process of wet spinning, especially if we add carbon nanotubes. Of course, we can use also conductive polymers, but in this particular case, adding carbon nanotubes allow us to produce fibers that are very interesting. This presence of dopamine can be used to produce very tough filaments. And as you see here in this plot of toughness versus strength, you see here how we can evolve by different controlling the different variables to make materials that are both stronger and also tougher. Usually there is a trade-off between the two properties, but by this process we can get both better elongation and also better young modulus. Conventional materials would be like these ones in the black arrow. So these are very interesting. And if you compare those filaments that are produced in this fashion by wet spinning, but compared to others, including polyolefins, the mechanical strength is very, very important. But what is more important and relevant, perhaps, is the fact that those filaments produced by a cellulose derivative grafted with dopamine are conductive. And we have been looking into sensing movement, as you can see here, and are very sensitive to changes for instance, in your arms, elbows, and in your body. Also can be used in electroactive wearables. In this particular case, if we put these filaments in a glove, as you can see here, then by using Joule heating, by just using the electrical resistance of the material, we can produce local heating. And that local heating is very reproducible. As you can see here, the current against time, we can cycle this on and off, and the temperature can be changed between 10 degrees and 60 degrees very, very easily. So that's an application for this type of advanced microfibers. Okay, let me go now to the table, and let's take a look at the vase that you see on the top. That can be 3D printed. So let's talk briefly about 3D printing. As you know, nanocellulose is a very exciting material as far as the rheological properties. It's a shear thinning hydrogel in water, and is really very nicely suitable for in this particular case, bioprinting. So this is a printer that we have both in Aalto in Finland. I also have here in UBC a 3D printing, and we have been looking into 3D printing of nanocellulose using different types of inks. In this particular case, I show on the right the case of tempo-oxidized nanocellulose, and I will show maybe a couple of examples related to this topic. The first point that I want to make is that one of the beautiful features of cellulose, as you know, is that it's biodegradable, not in the body, not in our body, but in the soil, in the oceans. Cellulose is biodegradable. In our body, it's not absorbable, but is excellent for its compatibility with cells. So in this particular case, what I want to show is how cellulose nanofibrils, tempo-oxidized nanofibrils, or acetylated nanocellulose that we also have been working show very good performance about cell viability. So this is very important. And what that means is that we can use these cellulosic materials in implants in our bodies. And an example that I have explained in other talks recently is the manufacture by 3D printing of this type of patches or grids that contain nanocellulose. And again, here, this is a structural element that allows us to 3D print the material, but also allows for cell to attach and proliferate. So that will be the function. But based on what I have explained so far, the idea of adding conductivity to the system is very easy. So before I show carbon nanotubes, in this particular case, polypyrrole. Adding polypyrrole allow us to 3D print the material, and now we have conductivity. And that's important in this type of patches because we want the system to be adhere to the heart. So, and as you know, the heart is an electroactive component. It moves, it has pulses, and also has electrical signals. So for that reason, we need conductivity in these patches. And since it's pulsating, we also need to have a grid or a patch that is also flexible. And for that, we use polyglycolide that helps to make the cellulose more flexible. So it's a beautiful example where cellulose is used for a multifunctional material by combination with other components. And this we have used for a number of applications, and there are several papers from the group that explain different formulations of the inks, including emulsions and others. And I wish I had more time, but this is just to give the example of 3D printing in one single application. The other case of cellulose, and this is a very recent work that we finished, is now published by my group together with colleagues in China, is the idea of making conductive electrolyte hydrogels. And the main topic or the main area here that is of interest is to have this type of hydrogels that are, one, conductive, and also that can be used in extreme cold conditions. This is very relevant, of course, for Scandinavian countries and also here in Canada, maybe not too much to Brazil, but in general, if you think about the cold chain, low temperature physics, and the use of cellulose in low temperature conditions, this is actually pretty important, including one thing that we have tested is the storage and preservation of food and vaccines using nanocellulose. So to give an example of what I'm saying here, this is how these hydrogels look like after storage at minus 80 degrees. They are extremely flexible and they recover the shape to a large extent. They are conductive, and again, the main component here is nanocellulose. If we have other materials, then it will be a very brittle material and it will break at low temperature. Since the other component in nanotechnologies that we talk often is nanocrystals, let me briefly mention applications for cellulose nanocrystals. And the first thing that I want to say here is that these rod particles are extremely interesting. As you may know, in Canada especially, there are many companies starting to produce in larger scale these nanocrystals. Maybe in Brazil, in South America, and also in Europe, the most important attraction goes to cellulose nanofibrils, and therefore we need to differentiate the uses of the two materials. In my mind, cellulose nanocrystals are ideal when we think about the chirality, the twist of the cellulose nanocrystals, and this is an example of the work of my postdoc that look into cryo-electron tomography to unveil this property in cellulose nanocrystals. Let me just check the time so that I think I need to wrap up very soon. So maybe I have only time to share with you an example of the use of these crystals, and this is to produce color, the so-called structural color. So I'm going there to look into how these cellulose nanocrystals self-assemble in water, producing this cholesteric phase that you see on the top right. So these are the so-called chiral nematic crystalline phase. So given the twist of the nanocrystal, they rearrange in aqueous dispersion and produce this helicoidal arrangement. If we remove the water, that water then will leave behind a film, and that will be this film of cellulose nanocrystals that is dry film. And of course, there is no water. And what you see here is the cross section. And this cross section shows, I hope that you can visualize is this helicoidal path that you see in solution is more or less translated to the film. And that's what gives rise to selective light reflection. And this is what gives rise to the so-called structural color. So these dry films of cellulose nanocrystals produce a beautiful light reflection and iridescence phenomena that is a very important technology for many applications, including sensing and counterfeiting and many, many others. In my group, the main one of the main properties that we exploit for these nanocrystals is to make coatings that are, producing these structural colors. On the right, I show the case of my students working on coatings on wood, and also an artist, Urs Bjerker. He's actually the one that designed the garments and the dresses in movies like Hunger Games. So I'm looking into the social artistic component of nanotechnologies, and in this particular case, this dress that you see here contains some slabs that are coated with cellulose nanocrystals to produce beautiful patterns that can be used in science fiction. And this is a huge interest in industry, in fact. Anyway, besides the artistic part, one thing that I need to say about structural color is that it resists fading. And surprisingly to us, that was never shown. We knew, but was not reported in the literature. And this is something that we did just to show the case that if we have a textile like a blue jean, when exposed for 6 months to simulated sun, then it would be the color would be lost. However, for these cellulose films produced with nanocrystals, nothing happened. And this is because we're dealing here not with a dye, it's not a pigment, it's a structural color that takes advantage of the nanotechnology. If you allow me, I know that I'm a little bit running out of time, but given that I started a little bit late and the introduction was a little bit long, maybe I want to show some work from this year from the group related to adhesives. And maybe I can stop there so that we have questions and answers, but very briefly, adhesives. Another example of using nanocellulose, nanocrystalline cellulose as adhesive. We have done this with emulsions and many others, but the interest here is to use plain cellulose suspensions in water, nothing else, nanocrystals in water, and placing the suspension between two objects. Letting the water to evaporate, that will take a very short time, and then looking into how the nanocrystals actually self-assemble between the two objects. And that assembly is actually pretty much similar to the gecko patterns for adhesion. And that's what we found here. When we glue two components with CNC in water, as shown here by Luis Greca, who is standing on this slab of wood, then we found a super glue. The cellulose nanocrystals really provide very strong resistance. And what we have here in linking the two pieces of wood are one droplet of this CNC suspension. So in the shear direction, it has a super glue capability. Very strong gluing or adhesive effect, 72 kilograms. It can go up to 90 kilograms with few drops of the material. At the same time, you notice that it's very easy to remove. By using the normal direction, we can remove the adhesive. So these are very important because in science, we're looking for systems that are very good adhesives in the shear, but not in the out of plane. And that's what we get here. And super glue that is fully bio-based. And that's what we have here. These are microfabricated adhesives, commercial structure adhesives, and they are extremely expensive. You notice how this simple mixture of cellulose and nanocrystals in water produce the highest anisotropy adhesion reported and very competitive shear strength. So with that, I think I better stop here. I wanted to talk a little bit about aerogels, but maybe it's better that we have a little bit of questions and answers. I think that would be nice. And maybe I will have a chance to talk about this during the questions and answers. So maybe this is a good point for me to stop. Maybe I can go very quickly to the conclusion slide. And let me just jump there. I put something about sensing, but this is my conclusion slide. The idea here is that really we have a huge opportunity to harness the natural properties of lignocellulose to create the next generation sustainable materials. And what best opportunity we have nowadays, like this COVID situation is really a very bad pandemic, but in our area, it's a huge opportunity to tell the government, to tell academia, funding agencies, to tell them that the forest products and the nanotechnologies of renewable materials can offer many solutions to the sustainable future. I will stop here, and I hope that that maybe there are some questions, and I would be happy to try to answer those questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Professor Rojas, I'm quite impressed with how far you can go with this kind of simple materials, this kind of very conventional materials. This is really fantastic. We have some questions, and naturally we have so many questions that can some other questions that probably would fulfill this a long time, 2 or 3 hours discussing this amazing number of results. I have my questions, my own questions, but I will use my time to do only one question. I was pretty impressed with your results about the hydrogels. These lignocellulosic hydrogels, they are quite impressive, especially by this property you showed, the electrical property of this hydrogel. But I wonder if you can say a little bit more about the swelling property of this hydrogel compared to conventional hydrogel, the commercial material. How is the performance of this material?
So, of course, this is a very important question, especially as we look into next generation super absorbents. So in the area of medical materials, diapers, and contingency products, absorbency of water is very important. And of course, there, having nanocellulose, especially with charges, so oxidized nanocellulose can be quite interesting material because it absorbs huge amounts of water. So I think this is a very important topic. So nanocellulose can be used for that purpose. You know, cellulose is hydrophilic, hygroscopic, and absorbs water, right? But when we have nanocellulose, that absorption of water is increased tremendously. And now if we add charges because of the osmotic contribution, then we have further increased swelling of the material, the hydrogels. So this is really great for some applications, right? Like diapers. But for other applications like 3D printing, and maybe this is what you are thinking, the same swelling can be a problem because if we want to dry the material, then this is a challenge, especially in 3D printing, for instance, right? So that still is remains as a problem. And for that, of course, we have the issue that when we dry the material, it really changes the stability, the dimensions of the material. It shrinks tremendously. And the way that we have coped, we have solved that problem is actually using emulsions. So we mix the nanocellulose in water with another material, can be an oil or an organic phase, and then we can really preserve the shape during the de-swelling. So I don't know the exact, more or less what you have in your mind, but what I try to explain is that swelling can be a problem. In some cases, it may be an advantage, but we have ways to control that phenomena, either by charges or by adding other components.
Actually, the first thing in my mind is replacing these non-renewable materials that we have for diapers, for instance. This is the first thing that comes to my mind. This seems to be really fantastic to have a kind of totally biodegradable diaper. This is something fantastic. This is totally far from my ideas. We have another questions. I will invite Caio to address some of our questions.
Great. Can you hear me, Orlando?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, thanks for the brilliant talk as usual. I also have my questions, but I can save this for later. I have a question by Stanley Bilato. He's a postdoc in the group in Embrapa. He's asking about the lignocellulosic fibers, the CNF containing residual lignin. In these fibers, how do you characterize the amount of lignin on the CNFs?
So this is, of course, a challenge, but I tell you what we do in the very practical way. What we do is we take the mechanical pulp or thermomechanical pulp that contains residual lignin. That can be measured easily by the traditional methods. So the lignin in the pulp, in the fiber, can be measured by the different methods where you obtain the lignin and you measure the amount or otherwise. So what we are assuming here is that the lignin that is in the fiber remains in the nanocellulose. The yield in microfluidization, that's what we use, is maintained. So if we assume that, then the amount of lignin in the nanocellulose is the same amount of lignin in the original fiber. And for that reason, then we can confidently say that we have around 28% of lignin in that particular case that I showed. Now, having lignin in the nanocellulose can really open a lot of opportunities. I just gave an example, but to make, for instance, films. to produce membranes for filtration that are also antimicrobial is a huge opportunity. So I think this is a very important question. And of course, as far as the measurement itself, we use the typical techniques where we hydrolyze the cellulose and then the residual lignin is measured by typical tools. Also, we can use enzymes to degrade cellulose and then look into what is the residual lignin. So, but the methods are the typical method for measuring lignin by sulfuric acid hydrolysis.
Professor Matoso has a couple of questions.
Yes, congratulations, Orlando, for your excellent, really excellent presentation, showing extremely interesting new properties and new application. I did appreciate it. Thank you. I have a question from Dr. Washington. He's also thanking you for the very nice presentation, as always. The question is, in order to wet spinning lignocellulose, is it necessary to tempo oxidation? Is the negative charge imposed by lignin enough for the coagulation of the fiber?
Yes, thank you, Washington, for the great question. So first, nanocellulose alone can be a wet spun by the same method. Having charges, however, helps us to have better alignment and to also coagulate better the system. So the short answer is twofold. First, wet spinning is possible even if the charges are low, if we use nanocellulose. And it can be either cellulose nanofibrils or cellulose nanocrystals as well. If we have charges like tempo oxidation or sulfate groups in CNC, then we can improve the alignment and get better coagulation. That helps. So this is actually possible. If we use lignin alone, wet spinning in our experience is not possible. We cannot do wet spinning with lignin alone. We have done solution blowing, we have done electrospinning, we have done wet spinning with lignin, but always we need additional additive. And in this particular case that I show was nanocellulose, but it could also be polyvinyl alcohol, polyethylene oxide, and other materials. Lignin is very difficult to align and is not going to form filaments by wet spinning. We need to put their supporting material. Now, the amount of lignin that we use was 70. We can reach up to 80%, but then the mechanical properties go down. So there is a limit to that. And these fibers, therefore, are not very strong, but can show, after carbonization, can show conductivity and other properties that are very, very interesting.
I have another question from...
Okay, perfect. Perfect, Matoso.
From Rafael Barbosa. Hi, Orlando. Thank you for the splendid lecture. My question is about the status of the large-scale production of lignocellulosics products, nanolignin, cellulose, nanofibers, nanocrystals. Are we approaching an industrial scale?
So I suppose that, just a moment, I suppose that Caio has another question, very similar question in that sense, Caio, from Leonardo Valadares.
Right. He's asking about the cost as well. I have a question about the cost of productivity of nanocellulose, which is usually high. How to overcome the cost of these materials to make it industrial?
Okay, these of course are very relevant questions. So one thing that I need to say related to the production. The production of nanocellulose is increasing. You have seen already probably the news that in Canada there is Celluforce. Celluforce is a company that very early on started to produce cellulose nanocrystals, and it has a large capacity of 1 ton per day. And now they are increasing to double that capacity. So that's an example. Another example is another company called Anomera here in Canada that is also producing cellulose nanocrystals, but it's not going to be by sulfuric acid hydrolysis, it's to produce carboxylated nanocellulose. And I can continue with several other examples only in Canada. If we go to the US, also many companies can be listed as producing or starting to produce nanocellulose. And if I move to Europe, Finland and Sweden mainly, there are many units that are producing nanocellulose, in many cases for internal consumption, but also for producing materials. So this is something that is evolving. I cannot say that there are many commercial products that use nanocellulose, but the interest is there. And if we take the signals of Celluforce in Canada, notice that they have partnered now with a cosmetic company. So that gives already us the idea that these cellulose nanocrystals can be used by a cosmetic company. Earlier, they were also partnered with Schlumberger. It's an oil service company. So here it's very important to highlight that there are users interested into utilizing nanocellulose. And that's for nanocellulose. For the lignin, of course, there are now occurring investments in the area. In Canada, there is the so-called lignoforce that we use a process to also separate lignin, not into nanoparticles, but just to separate and commercialize lignin. And of course, there are many like this. For us, actually, in the Bioproducts Institute, we are now applying for a Western Economic Development Fund. And I'm going to promote the idea of producing nano lignin in the labs in larger scale so that we can de-risk the process and maybe have more partnerships involved. As far as the question of cost, I maybe can use this slide here that I have prepared. And the references are in the bottom. You can read about it. But this is I think this is a very solid techno-economic analysis. And I have to say that for cellulose nanofibrils, our numbers report to around $1.5 per kilogram. For cellulose nanocrystals, about 4 times that value, $3.5 to $4.5 per kilogram. And for nanolignin, about $900 per ton, or 90 cents per kilogram. Noting that this was our earlier publication, but we have recent work with organosolved lignin, and that price goes down to 60 cents per kilogram. So these are very promising alternatives as far as the price structure. So the materials are not really that expensive. They're actually quite competitive if you think about the performance that you can achieve.
Great. Matoso has another question.
Yeah, I have another question by Eduardo Baques. He's wondering if you could give any additional comment about the cross-linking of lignocellulosic systems.
So, as you know, the cross-linking will happen already when we have, for instance, 3D printing or the wet spinning that I indicated earlier. In those processes, we can have cross-linking just by using complexation with multivalent cations. So if we have tempo-oxidized nanocellulose and in the spinning dope we have calcium, as I showed earlier, that complexation can lead to cross-linking. But it's not a typical cross-linking, it's a complexation rather. When it comes to cross-linking, I can give many examples, for instance, using different components, using glutaraldehyde or genipine, as well as many other cross-linking. So cross-linking is an important aspect of this type of work. We have done it especially with chitin, nanochitin, and that works really, really well. I don't think I have it here. No, I don't think I have it here. But it's a very interesting process and very easy to achieve in the case of nanocelluloses. I was looking for the slides. I don't have it here. But it's very feasible, right? And I don't know exactly what the question was, But cross-linking,
he's asking if you can use calcium chloride.
oh yes. So exactly, that's my answer. Yes, calcium is very effective cross-linker. When you wet spin nanocellulose, and for that you can use in wet spin as well as in 3D printing. You 3D print the structure and then you add calcium chloride, and then the structure can solidify. The other aspect of this type of complexation that I skipped is in this example with cellulose or nanocellulose or nanochitin. The complexation is so strong, as you can appreciate here. If we use an alginate hydrogel and chitin nanofibers, the complexation, in this case between the particle and the polyelectrolyte, is so strong that you can spin a filament. This is work of, yes.
Is it reversible?
This is actually pretty strong. It's not really fully reversible. Once you have this complexation and you dry the material or the filaments that are produced in this interfacial complexation, then the water is removed and you have some sort of esterification that makes the fiber to become water resistant. You can see that here on the right. The fibers that are produced by this type of complexation can be resistant to water. Not fully resistant, but they have 80% residual wet strength, which is amazing. You use two materials, both very hydrophilic, wettable by water, yet when they complex, they become water resistant. The same we have seen in the case of chitosan. So if we use chitosan and nanocellulose, this is a beautiful opportunity to produce wet strength. Maybe, let me see if I have a slide about that. I think I have, maybe here. This is a slide that I didn't show because of time, but it's amazing to see that if we take nanocellulose and we mix it with chitosan, we produce super transparent films that are shown here. So the film is on top, but you don't see any opacity. It's fully transparent. You see the transmittant here, very transparent, and at the same time they are resistant to water. And again, you use chitosan that is you know, hydrophilic. You use nanocellulose, hydrophilic, but the complexation produces something that is quite strong.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Perfect. I believe that Caio has another question from one of our colleagues.
We've got a couple of questions here. One is from Renan da Silva Fernandes. He's congratulating you on the presentation and wondering about the 3D structures that you are using for as implants, 3D printed scaffolds and implants. Have you been working on any specific implant? If so, are the results promising?
So two things, and thank you for the question. One of the best options for implants in the body is actually bacterial cellulose. And bacterial cellulose is already being used in large animal surgery. I know some surgeons in Poland that are already operating by placing implants of bacterial cellulose in the body of large animals. And there are many examples like this also for human. In the case of nanocellulose, implants are possible, but of course, that depends very much on the regulation that is still ongoing. But from what I presented earlier and other evidence, there is no immunoresponse, there is no genotoxicity effects of nanocellulose in the body. That has been shown in different applications. For instance, producing suturing threads or filaments for suturing is possible with nanocellulose. And implants themselves is also possible. I have actually a current project with a startup company that is looking into implants in meshes in the body, in organs, and the results are quite promising. So the point is, nanocellulose can be safe in implants, but you have to keep in mind that it's not absorbable. In the body, we don't have the enzymes to degrade cellulose, so the material will stay. On the contrary, if we think about chitin, there are chitinases that are able to degrade chitin materials in the body. So that would be more bioabsorbable compared to cellulose. And the short answer is there is a lot of promise in the area of biomedical materials using nanocellulose.
Great, Caio.
Great. I have another one.
You have another question?
Yes, by Henriette Azeredo, who is a researcher from the house, from Embrapa. She is congratulating you for the brilliant talk as usual. Any studies on the effect of residual hemicellulose on the fibers? She says, okay, I suppose it would depend on the hemicellulose structure, of course, but anyway, do you have any information on that?
So this is a very important question. And I tell you what I think. I don't think we produce nanocellulose without hemicellulose. Hemicellulose is always present. Even if we think that we have removed, bleached, and chemically treated the fibers, hemicellulose, residual hemicellulose is always present. We have found this in many different ways. It's very difficult to detect or to measure, but there is always residual hemicellulose. So that's one point. The second point, the activity on hemicellulose is very important in the future. So far, hemicellulose is not being produced at an industrial scale, but you can read from industry interest that hemicellulose should be considered in future biorefineries. And if so, hemicellulose can play a very important role. As you know, hemicellulose are polysaccharides, and they can bring new opportunities to fine-tune the properties of nanocellulose. We have used hemicelluloses in other applications, including wet spinning. But in some, I think hemicellulose should be considered. Earlier, I talked about the investments of UPM in Germany for using lignin, and hemicellulose is the other component that they are thinking about utilizing. I'm in contact with big companies that are investing in this area, and there is a huge interest in hemicelluloses. But again, commercially, still, there is a challenge in producing hemicellulose at low price.
Matoso has a question from our colleague, Moss Lady Rosa. You know.
Moss Lady Rosa is congratulating you for the very nice talk and saying that's she's really glad to see you again. She's asking if you could comment on the stabilization of Pickering emulsion, which is an area that you have very nice work.
Absolutely. That's actually my favorite topic, but I need a long time to explain about Pickering stabilization. It's very important, definitely. It's one of my favorite topics. And I have to say that the opportunity here is huge for nanocellulose. Just to give a little bit of a flavor, we have been looking at this diagram. It's a bidimensional map where we have oil, we have water, and we have stabilized the interface using nanocellulose. In such a way, we have produced oil in water emulsions like the one here, water in oil emulsions or inverted emulsions, as well as double emulsions. Huge opportunities in this area. The most important thing, perhaps, is the fact that this can really be an opportunity in the health sciences and food sectors, producing Pickering stabilizations. That's shown here for oil in water emulsions with nanocellulose stabilizing the interface. And in particular, one important activity that we have in the group is to look into food emulsions. In the future, we think using 3D printing and other technologies, there is an opportunity for nanocellulose to be used in the future foods. And for that, I have a collaboration with Professor McClemens in the University of Massachusetts. And we're looking into the effect of nanocellulose in the production of Pickering emulsions, especially what happened with those emulsions in your body. And for this, we have been looking at in vitro GIT models that allow us to understand what happened with these emulsions in our GIT tract. And the conclusion, essentially, tells us that when we use cellulose for Pickering stabilization of emulsions, we can really produce a very interesting effect. And is the fact that the free fatty acids that are released are reduced. So in this example with time, in the GIT track, we compare nanocellulose stabilized emulsions with those that are stabilized with gums. That this is a typical stabilizer. And you see here how nanocellulose avoids or reduce the liberation or the digestion of lipids. This can be very important for health diet applications. All in all, the opportunity for nanocellulose is huge in the area of food and also in pharma, in the cold chain, in preserving bioactive compounds, and also in the digestion process.
Continuing the questions, she's wondering if nanocellulose, bacterial nanocellulose, is really a food-grade ingredient for forming Pickering emulsions. She means an edible emulsifier. Are there regulatory issues to overcome?
This is correct. She's right. Nanocellulose in general is not widely accepted as a emulsifier. Here I'm talking about food emulsions. In fact, when we eat food, we eat cellulose, we eat lignin all the time. But I'm thinking about the nanocellulose produced industrially. In Canada and in Norway, as well as in Japan, the regulatory and the the regulatory landscape is moving to accept nanocellulose in food grade materials. So for nanocellulose, that's what I know. I think in the future we will have food grade materials based on nanocellulose, right? Bacterial cellulose is fully food grade. So here I show the case of bacterial cellulose. This is a pellicle that is produced. And in bacterial cellulose, we have already products. And a typical one is nata de coco. So this is something that you can go to the Asian market and you can find those products. And they are, they are sold especially for kids because you can put sugars and you have very delicious and colorful food. So the short answer is bacterial cellulose is already being used as a food ingredient. Nata de coco is an example, but nanocellulose requires regulation to be fixed so that it can be used in food products. Minding that microcellulose is already being used and other types of cellulose, of course, are already being used in food and in pharma.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have some 2 or 3 minutes, some minutes for a couple of questions. We have a very last minute question. I have received this question right now from Ana Carolina Figueiredo Prado. She congratulates you for that very nice, fantastic presentation, and also she also highlighted how nice are the slides, how well designed, how beauty is the presentation. That really, I have the same opinion. She asks about the utilization of these nanofibers, these nanocellulose nanofibers are restricted to biomaterials. Actually, you have commented about the food applications, but there are other possible applications, including engineering materials. Could you give some words?
Sorry for in bioengineering, you ask, right?
Yeah, more than bioengineering. I believe that she's more looking more for a wide perspective of how far can you go with nanofibers, with cellulose nanofibers.
Okay, I have a lot of examples actually. So the first thing, thank you for the comment on my slides. I spend a lot of time making my slides. Sometimes my students help me, but my mother language is Spanish. And besides that, I'm very shy. So I need to prepare good slides to bring a message across. And that's how I do. But to the question, I can give you several examples. Maybe I don't have the slides here. I hope you can see the slides. But one example is this one. let me show maybe, because maybe you are thinking on more scale-up application or industrial applications, and we're active in this area. One example is this one. This is a process that we're using to make membranes that are porous, lightweight materials. We use a process called foam forming. In foam forming, we use a foam, we have fibers, and then we deposit the foam in a running belt. This is a typical non-wovens process that is used in so-called wet laying. And this process is the one that we're utilizing to make face masks, COVID face masks, in fact. And as I told you, there is a company already investing in this. So as a structural material, as I heard, nanocellulose can be used as an additive of this type of non-wovens or materials to help to boost the performance of the material. For instance, infiltration and insulation, both thermal and acoustic insulation, from the point of view of a structural material. So I think there is a huge opportunity in this area of lightweight structural materials for two reasons. One, with little amount of material, we produce a structure. And second, these structures are long-lived, meaning that we can store carbon for longer time. And that's one of the goals in measuring the carbon footprint. Make structural materials that are long-lasting. And an example is the one that I'm showing here in this slide. The other example that maybe I didn't have time to talk, but is important in nanotechnologies. Let me see if I have a slide about it. I have many slides, but maybe not here. Let me see. No, I don't have. But one that is very hot nowadays is structures that are based on wood, not even nanocellulose, keeping wood and using wood to produce transparent panels as well as insulating materials, where nanotechnology is used, but in a different manner. That would be another example of a structure nanotechnology based on cellulose. And finally, the topic that I didn't talk because of time, but of course, is also very important as a structure. Let me just very briefly go there. And that would be aerogels. So that gives me the chance to share with you the work on aerogels. These aerogels as a structure are extremely interesting. Essentially, if you think about cellulose nanocrystals, you can produce aerogels, but the toughness and the strength will be very low. If you structure the aerogels so that you preserve the chiral nematic structure, you can produce super strong structural materials based on cellulose nanocrystals. And that's what we published last year. In this type of aerogels that contain CNC cellulose nanocrystals, you see this material here is supporting there a brick of 2 kilograms. That means 170 tons per square meter. You see here the little thing. So lightweight materials that are structured with cellulose nanocrystals, keeping the chiral nematic arrangement as an excellent option for advanced structural materials.
Great. I believe that Caio has a very last question about sensors. And after Caio's intervention, I would like to invite everyone to, who wants to directly address a question to Professor Ruas is invited now to open your camera. We'll have time for 2 or 3 questions, not more than this, because we're approaching we're more than 4 p.m. now. Yeah, but that's really is a very good, that's a very good effect. This shows that your presentation was really appreciated by 100 persons, 100 people. That we have had 120 people in this presentation. So I am pretty amazed. I think that many of your questions you can send by us by email. And Caio, please do your intervention.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kelly. I have a question myself, if I may. I saw in your follow-up slides and the center and Embrapa instrumentation in particular is very interested in sensing devices. So I was wondering, how do these biorenewables apply to sensing?
Of course, I can talk hours about the topic, and in fact, we have a project with the European Union called In Paper. You can Google that word, In Paper. Essentially, here we're making paper-based electronics where we have tailored sensors here that are connected with antennas, with batteries, and electrochromic displays. So this is more or less autonomous paper that can be used in active intelligent packaging. And of course, nanocellulose is very important here. Looking only at the sensor part, the sensors, of course, that's very important. And you can think about microfluidics and other applications where sensors are very relevant. The question is why nanocellulose? The reason why nanocellulose is so interesting to making sensors is, if you think about CNF, cellulose nanofibrils, is that they make ultra thin films and they can be very easy to functionalize. So we have been using nanocellulose films in this type of tools, QCM and SPR, that are used for following the sensing capability. But the point of the sensor itself is that nanocellulose can be used very nicely to graft biomolecules. And an example here is that temp-oxidized nanocellulose can be very easily modified by absorption of polymers to produce anti-fouling surfaces. And then those same surfaces can be used for immobilization of biomolecules. So the short answer is, Caio, cellulose is a beautiful platform to immobilize biomolecules and to be used as a sensor, either as a self-standing film sensors, as papers, as the one that I show, as well as in analytics in QCM and SPR substrates for following sensing phenomena.
Great, Professor. Keeping that question, still keeping that question about sensing. We know that other groups are developing some platforms using conventional paper, but it's still not clear for me the advantage of nanocellulose instead of conventional paper or regular paper as a basic platform for a sensor.
I agree with you. I mean, there is no reason why to use nanocellulose as a sensor. In fact, it's better to use paper. The only advantage of having nanocellulose is the fact that the paper, let's call it nano paper, can be transparent, and in some activities that can be useful. Yes. And also that you can enhance the strength and produce super strong materials. But in the particular case of paper-based microfluidics, maybe nanocellulose is not preferred because the fluid flow is prevented with nanocellulose. It's better to have more porosity. So, you know, it depends on the type of sensing. For this application in QCM and SPR, for instance, we cannot use paper, right? Here we have to use nanoscale materials. So for the analytics, it's very good. For the application, I will go for paper.
Great. Great. I need to thank you a lot. We have received many acknowledgements of the chance of that to participate in that very nice seminar webinar. Some of our participants, they congrats also, as Deusenide Silva is congrating you for that nice presentation. Much later, you can open your microphone to address your last comments. Your microphone is open. Much later, she comes and she went off. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
If I may, one thing that I wanted to say that I really love to interact with Brazilians. I am a lot of fun of Brazilians. I was born in Venezuela, so I'm neighbor to you. and I think the future of these technologies, especially based on forest resources, is very important for South America. So I really want to boost the interaction between Canada and Finland with Brazil and in general South America. That's my mission. First and foremost, I'm part of your same native South American heritage. So I'm very proud of South America.
That is fantastic, Professor. After your presentation, I confirm that you got at least one follower. I am this follower, perfect. But I suppose that you got a lot of other followers. That's really interesting. We really need to do this kind of partnerships. Matoso, give the final address your final comments.
Yes, I'm very glad, Orlando, to hear that from you. You're a very nice person and I'm really very, very impressed with the huge amount of work and the quality of work that you do and the variety of applications that you work. And our nanotech or Rede Agro Nano has a lot of affinity and cross areas of mutual interest because we work with trying to use nanotechnology to develop new applications for renewable materials. So I'm very glad and impressed with your presentation. Thank you so much for giving our very precious time for our network to present your work. I'm really glad, and I hope you can visit us in the near future of this pandemic. And during this time also, with the help of Caio, we can discuss collaborative work together. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm words. I'm more than happy to continue the collaboration. The arms are open and you are welcome in Canada anytime.
Same here.
Making inversions in the typical sequence of final speeches. Caio, as the youngest, you can have the pleasure to give the final words.
Thanks, Cauê. I do appreciate, Orlando, your time and the invitation by Cauê and Matoso. We are always learning from you, and Orlando is I can say the scientific range is quite broad, but the quality and the deepness is extremely high. And he's always open to collaborate and to receive and to host students, to discuss science. And he's a really great leader, as Matoso is also a really great leader. And they are always inspiring us. So it's really a pleasure to listen and to learn from them. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Caio. I think that we don't have more questions. I have invited, if Morslade, Washington, you want to give some final words, please feel free in here to our other colleagues. Washington, if you want to give some final words.
Washington, you have to mute. One thing, Washington invited me to his home in Brazil, and I had the best barbecue in his house.
Yeah.
That's because we didn't have the opportunity to have a barbecue with us here in São Carlos.
Yeah, but I don't think that the barbecue in São Carlos is much good as we had here. But anyway, it's always a pleasure hearing from you. I'm a bigger fan, and so I hope we can do a lot of work together in the near future and keep doing something very interesting. So very, very, very thank you to give us this talk. It's very nice and very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Washington. Much appreciated.
Great. I think that this is the end. We have advanced 15 minutes in our time, but that's perfect. I'm really glad, Professor Rojas, for your talk. This is the initial talk of a sequence of webinars that we want to do in our AgroNano network. As you know, the AgroNano network, probably Caio has shared some information about the network with you. The idea is to join a group of researchers. Most of them are researchers from Embrapa or institution, but many of them are in university. Some are former students, such as Caio is, but other are colleagues like Professor Leonardo Faceto, who is with us, other colleagues that Professor Silvia Bettini, many of them are collaborating with us. Matoso?
Cristiane Sanchez.
Cristiane, yeah, many of them, Henriette, many of them that are collaborating in different topics. The wide number of applications you are doing in your laboratory, in your research lines, this was a perfect kind of presentation to introduce the idea of webinars, these webinars for our colleagues, because we have covered probably 85% of all the kind of research we are doing in the AgroNano network. So I am very glad of your acceptance to give you this initial speech, this initial lecture. We will keep inviting our colleagues to do other lectures, other colleagues to do other lectures like this one each month during this very strange times we are living. But anyway, this is the alternative that we have, and honestly, we are doing this in the best manner possible, in the best possible manner. We have had a good group of colleagues discussing today, so we invite all you colleagues for the next webinars. Everyone that needs a certificate or a confirmation of participation, you can write an email to Embrapa. I will put the email in chat now, asking for the certificate. And one for everyone, have a good afternoon or morning there. There in Canada, is it still morning or?
Noon actually.
Noon actually. Have a good lunch.
Great.
And for all you colleagues in Brazil, have a good afternoon and see you in some weeks, I hope.
Great. Excellent.
I would like also to thank everybody, all the attendees for the attendance, the participations. And thank you again, Orlando.
Oh, my pleasure.
Really nice.
Big pleasure. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Todos os que precisarem de certificados, certo? Vocês, por favor, mandem um e-mail instrumentacal.nco@embrapa.br.
Obrigado a todos pela presença. Muito obrigado mesmo.